Clearly, this is a provocative statement, but it raises the issue, as we said earlier, as to what extent absolute privacy is theft, and perhaps what are the appropriate safeguards and barriers, which is the key to this area, that we should be putting in place. And we'll come on to the ethics and the other ways of actually utilising this data in a little while. Clearly, each individual is very different in terms of the way that they actually recognise their data, but it's also quite interesting to see how willing people are, perhaps, to give away their to give away their data in certain instances. But I still question. I think it's an important thing that we should be questioning ourselves right through this whole process, and as privacy looks into the future, as to what extent that we do have that right bargain between the state and the individuals, what role the individual has in respect of the obligations and the responsibilities that they have to hand over that data to the state, or alternatively to private companies to be able to then hand over to the state, and to what extent private companies should also be perhaps working together in order to provide a solution for a specific problem. Again, these are further examples how actually, certainly with the combination of the data sets and the issues of anonymisation, which is not something for this particular talk, to what extent, certainly with the large data sets that we have at the moment, we heard this again earlier today, the possibility to repersonalise that data, but to get also more accurate results of that. Now, that, of course, creates a lot of problems, but lots of opportunities for philanthropists. We also have tensions in particular regulations. So at the moment, for example, in Europe, you have the Payment Services Directive 2, and that ensures that large payment network providers have to open up their services to other newer players in the same way that BT and other companies across Europe were forced to open up their networks to newer players 10 or 15 years ago with deregulation. The same thing happens here, and of course that creates a sensitivity and a tension with privacy laws. There might be, of course, also cultural inhibitors in terms of what kind of data that we can collect and how accurate that data can actually be as a result. And clearly there are, of course, the cyber risk issues that we will talk about. Andreas, I think you might want to talk about the corporate social responsibility elements and data as the asset class.
As the asset class, yeah. I think it's quite. If you look at the data for the data, so economic growth in GDP, global GDP, is now more relevantly defined in terms of the increase in data flows than the increase in the global trade of goods. The data flows as such create an economy the size of Norway every year. So basically putting an inhibitor on these data flows really harms economic activity and gets back to the point we need to find a bargain of using data for societal interest, but without totally being unaware of at least accepting the fact that companies very rarely go through great length and take great risks without wanting to see some sort of financial reward at the end. I can talk about the payment industry. I was with MasterCard before, I'm with Worldpay now. We're spending a lot of time trying to make payments more efficient, more effective, and the payment system is traditionally very notoriously fragmented. There are lots of players there, and it's not an easy job, but there is a general will to do this. And obviously, data as a side product of this effort is very important for us to understand what the services are people looking for. Are people looking for the microchip in their arm so they can wave their way through payment barriers, or are they actually much happier to get a £10 note out and get some coins back? And without having the ability to analyze their data and look at it, it would be very difficult to conceive new services, for example, and making sure that you hit the right, you strike the right note between privacy and big data. I think, and we only have a few minutes left, so I want to sort of point the discussion towards what can we do. We can't just release data in its raw form, individual data. I mean, everyone would agree with that. You don't need to be a privacy specialist to understand that. It's about trust. It's about people wanting to know what's happening to their data, transparency. And the only I think, reasonable framework we can use is to create ethics, legal frameworks, and the right bargain between big companies and the individual where this data can be used. And there have been discussions, for example, around obviously GDPR being the preeminent legal framework here, which is influencing clearly other laws in the world, but also ethical frameworks. BSI Group, for example, the British Standard Institute, has launched initiatives around the ethical use of data. There are people who have been calling for a universal declaration of digital rights, for example. I think a very, very good effort to bring some structure into the discussion. So there are a number of efforts to tackle this, but I think that's for all of us is to help along the discussion and see whether we need a kind of Hippocratic oath for the profession to make sure that we build these principles into privacy by design, for example, and when we look at these big data sets, to make sure that we can utilize the data, but also in a secure and in a reasonable form.